You might think as an unfettered free market capitalist, I would want to stay as far away from any country with a left-leaning government. And in many cases, that's true. But today, I'm going to answer the question of when I actually don't mind being in a left-leaning country. And by left-leaning, I'm not talking about what you might see in some countries, more personal freedom. I'm talking about countries that are economically repressive. They have high taxation. They have lots of bureaucracy. Maybe they impose restrictions on you. People have often asked, Andrew, how can you spend time in a country like Colombia when they have insanely high taxes? Why would you want to be there? And doesn't that go against your message of go where you're treated best? And I'm going to answer the question. We got this asked a lot, actually, when we filmed Live Like a King in Bogota. And people asked my opinion about the new left-wing government and what impact that would have. First, on the tax piece, we've answered this before. Tax residence is determined by a certain amount of physical presence, as well as in some countries, other factors. I don't have that presence or those other factors in a country like Colombia. And so in the same way that you might go on a vacation to Paris, France, which has insanely high taxes, a tourist is not taxed. In fact, when you leave, they give you your tax back on things that you purchased in many cases. And so as far as the role of tax is concerned, my time in Colombia every year, even though I maintain a residence permit and might in the future decide to maintain citizenship there, my taxation is effectively that of a tourist. I am not in the tax net. I do have a small property tax bill to pay on my home there. It's about $1,000 a year. That's because that asset is sitting in Colombia. And if I put, I think, about $1 million between the value of that home and if I wanted to put it in bank accounts or stocks in the country, there would be a wealth tax on those local assets. But generally speaking, I don't have local assets. When I moved to Colombia, I didn't move any of my wealth there. I have a small bank account for the sake of just having a bank account. I don't even know that I really use it. It's there. I mostly, pay my bills through a property manager who is wired the money. And I own a home, which gives me some level of lifestyle benefit, as well as geographic and geopolitical and currency diversification. And that's about the extent of my interaction with Colombia. Would I ever live there full time? No, not only for the tax reasons, but for other reasons as well. And so in that regard, what the tax rates are in that country don't particularly bother me. Now, regardless of which government gets into power in any country, if they do certain things to screw up the lifestyle there, then that's an issue. And sure, I have not personally experienced it. Water has been an issue in the last year in Bogota. It's not been something that I've dealt with. I think perhaps my building has some way to deal with it. Now, I would argue, you probably don't want to be spending time in a country where other people don't have water. That's not a good thing. And so in that regard, if the government in charge created that, then I'm against them. But let's not extrapolate that to any other government. I'm not saying I would be voting in some left-leaning government that wants to raise your taxes and do a bunch of stupid stuff with tax money. I'm generally not in favor of that. But Doug Casey, who has spoken every year at Nomad Capitalist Live, regaled us again this year with his story that when he goes to live in Argentina, he's seen as the wealthy foreigner, and they pretty much leave him alone. I do think that in these countries, the bigger threats are generally the people who are the locals. The locals are more politically active, for example. The locals are the ones whose businesses they want to tax. You have some business that's incorporated in Hong Kong and it sells stuff online and nobody locally is buying your services. I leave them alone. Now, again, if you become a tax resident in that country, there may be some tax obligations you have to comply with. Even then, there's left-leaning countries that have favorable tax regimes. Uruguay's had one even during left-leaning governments. They have very reasonable and even zero tax regimes for foreigners. And so sometimes those taxes don't even impact you. But of course, anyone who mismanages the country, it's not a place where I want to be. And yet long-term, I think places like Colombia will be a good bet. There will be some bumps along the way, as there was in any country that ascended. But I agree with Doug in large part, and he did say, we've known each other long enough now, please call me Doug and not Mr. Casey. But I think that people have a certain addiction, attachment perhaps is the better word, to their country, and they assume wherever they go, they're going to replicate that. The attachment you have to your country, in my opinion, is due to a certain social conditioning, in part by the government that wants you to stay there, wants you to pay taxes, and wants you to not question what they do. Are you going to go to a new place and adopt that same attachment? Even if you do, it will be an earned attachment. In the same way that, sure, you have a certain attachment to people in your family that you were born around, but when you go out and you choose a spouse, or when you go out and choose friends, that's someone that you've vetted and they've earned that attachment. It didn't just come from being born into the family. And so, when you do something intentionally, that's always better than when you do something unintentionally. Attachment to a place that you just happen to be born in and they told you, hey, isn't this great? And you're like, yeah, I guess so. I'm 4. Sure, whatever you say. Moving to Argentina, in Doug's case, for example, let's say you're 40 years old. If you develop that level of attachment, it'll be for all the right reasons. But I think for most of us, for me, I enjoy the places I go. I try and contribute to various local causes. I have local friends. I try and learn some of the language. I want to learn the culture and the foods and, various aphorisms and all that kind of. I want to be able to fit in. Am I ever going to feel like, oh my God, this is my place? I don't know if that's the goal in life. And so I think that all that being said, the idea that you're going to go to Argentina, Colombia, or any name of any other country out there, and you're going to have the same goal to make the country exactly the image that you think it should be, left wing, right wing, I got to vote for the right guy. I don't think it's going to exist. I go to Colombia and I'm largely detached from the politics, the same way I am in pretty much every other country where I spend time. Now, obviously, we saw Doug Casey said he's going to Sri Lanka later this year. Yeah, Sri Lanka had some pretty serious problems a couple of years ago. Now, as an investor, buy when there's blood in the streets. As a place to live, I wouldn't be going to Sri Lanka anytime soon. But you know what? Doug and I will share notes, and we'll let you know if there's an opportunity. Left-wing or right-wing government, if people are screwing up the place to where you can't live there, and they're creating social unrest, even if you can't live there, other people are going to be coming for you eventually. That's not a good thing. But my general philosophy involves diversification. People have a hard time understanding that when you move to Mexico or when you move to Colombia, or let's just any of these Latin American countries where the banking generally isn't as is good, or it's just a pain, or for whatever reason, you don't want to put all your millions there. People have a hard time understanding. When you move to Mexico, you're not taking your millions with you. You're moving to Mexico as a person. Maybe you'll be in the tax net, maybe you won't. But your money's going somewhere else. Your company's going somewhere else. And again, it's that attachment we have to our home country where people are so concerned about how do I keep all my eggs in one basket? Oh, you're moving to Mexico. Do you start a Mexican company? Or even, I'll tell you, high-level bankers. I'll go down to Singapore every once in a while. I'll talk to a banker, or I'll talk about opening a new account. And they'll say, oh, you live in Malaysia. Oh, you gave up your U.S. citizenship. Are you a Malaysian citizen now? It's like, the country's right next door. Half the time, they're actually from Malaysia, the banker. They just moved to Singapore. It's like, I realize we don't know how hard it is to get our own citizenship that we're born with, but really nobody gets Malaysian citizenship. No, I'm not a Malaysian citizen. I live in Malaysia and I have other citizenships, and I've diversified myself. And I think that we've been so well conditioned to this attachment. And so I don't like economically repressive policies. I'm sure as a politically homeless person, I can find some things that I could agree with any politician on, and a lot that I disagree with them on. But what I believe is diversification is important. I also believe that some of the fears people believe are going to happen. And I think some people think it's more likely under a left-wing government. Oh, they're going to come. If I do Turkey's citizenship buy investment program and buy a $400,000 apartment, who knows when some minister might just come and take my apartment one day. They're coming after foreigners' investments. I don't think that's generally true to the extent it was in the past. I think everyone realizes where their bread is buttered for the most part these days, with a few exceptions. I certainly think that they're looking to come after foreigners' assets. They're taking over an oil well somewhere. They're not coming for your 2-bedroom apartment. And so my exposure to places in left-wing governments might be a proverbial 2-bedroom apartment. And I look at that in the same way I might look at, yes, I have a small bank account in Colombia, but that's not where I'm moving my wealth. I have a tunnel in Colombia. If for whatever reason Colombia had a dramatically better banking system, or their currency was something that I wanted to be more in league with, I could move more money in because I have the tunnel. In the same way that the home, a pied-à-terre, is a sort of tunnel. during the pandemic, I was able to go to Colombia. And I mean, there were countries whose politics you might not have otherwise agreed with that were more open during the pandemic. And, are you concerned in that moment? That's the place. I don't think that you are. And so for me, I think I'm a bit detached from the politics. I look at the results. I realize, far left policies are probably pretty destructive. You know what? Some far right policies are pretty destructive as well. Maybe more for citizens. I do happen to think that if there was one side of the equation that wanted to tell people you shouldn't leave the country, or you can't leave the country, or you shouldn't have a second passport, it's probably the far, far right rather than the far, far left. And so I just think that it's easy to overlook the problems in our own country and look at just how many problems Western legacy brand countries have. And say, well, what about your little apartment in Bogota, and you're spending a couple weeks a year there? The president of El Salvador said it well. If there was a riot in the streets of San Salvador, it'd be international news. It's melting down. The place is it's chaos. When people are throwing Molotov cocktails in Paris, there's a little fracas. Yeah, people, they're protesting the retirement age. Come on, give them a break. And we see some of these emerging countries differently. If I lived in Mexico, would I have voted for the current president? No, I probably wouldn't have. I also know I can go to Mexico. There's always an opportunity to make money in some company there, whether it's in the stock market, whatever else. I'm a long-term believer in places like the countries we talk about, including Mexico. Okay, the peso went down under a left-wing president. Great, I'll buy more pesos. I'm not looking to invest for 25 minutes or 25 weeks. I'm looking to invest for 25 years, and I believe long-term the fundamentals are right. In the same way, I think you can elect a politician I agree with on everything, and I think he's got all the right approach in a country like the U.S. or the U.K. I don't think you can't fix it. The problems are too entrenched. What I also understand is I'm on a mission constantly to find the next Singapores. I think that it will be the next Singapore of this, Singapore of that. Will there be one great overarching place that people go to for so many things? No. There'll be the Singapore of AI, the Singapore of blockchain, the Singapore of this, of that. And listen, like Doug Casey, some of the places that I go to will be failures. But I'm judging on a longer timeline than today, tomorrow, and next week. And sure, countries that have a culture of electing crazy left-wing, tax the rich, squeeze everybody dry governments, I've got a challenge. I've got a problem with that. In Latin America, I get that vibe in Bolivia. I think that's kind of more of the culture. Can't say I entirely don't understand why that's the perspective, but I'm a lot less concerned about why. It's probably a place I wouldn't go. Latin America in general is a bit less interesting to me because it does kind of have this moody political climate where even if it's right-wing for a while, the countries always swing back and do something stupid. Doesn't mean I couldn't own a home there, though. Doesn't mean I couldn't spend time there. Doesn't mean I might not even have an investment there. And so occasionally I'm going to be wrong on some of these places. But I'm looking to be so well diversified and capitalize on all the up-and-coming places. One will not up and come. As to whether I see Colombia becoming a full Venezuela, as one person asked, I think it's a lifestyle and a business hub for me. If the people decide to make it Venezuela, I guess I'll be on my way. That said, we have a couple people here from Venezuela, and Venezuela is certainly not perfect, and yet they are living there. They are safe. They are well-fed. One of them loves living there, and is showing us all the places where the rich people live, and you can buy a house, and hey, it's really affordable. So I don't agree with the politics in Venezuela. I do not. I think it's good to have counterbalances geopolitically. And that's part of why the U.S. and other Western powers won't be as important in years to come, because there will be more counterbalances, not necessarily Venezuela. But to say that everyone in Venezuela is in terrible shape, and if Colombia becomes that, listen, if Colombia becomes that, I guess I won't spend that much time there anymore if I can't do it. But I'll tell you, I've known friends who were going to Venezuela for the last 3 or 4 years. They're saying, hey, it's become pretty safe. The criminals have gone. You can live there nicely. And that's kind of the perspective that I take. I'm not as focused on politics other than the culture. And as long as the country is moving in the right direction. I don't know that Venezuela is moving in the right direction. I think Colombia in the long term will go in the right direction. I think Malaysia is moving in the right direction. I think most of the countries we talk about are moving in the right direction. But, besides, geopolitical diversification is a good thing. If you could buy some kind of home in Venezuela 3 or 4 years ago, you could have bought something for next to nothing, and you would have had diversification. 20 years from now, the roles reverse. That's a bet I might have taken back then. For me, if you're stuck in the right-left paradigm, you're not going to be as successful as a nomad capitalist. I am not one of these capitalists who says, oh, you don't need principles. I think you very much need principles. You need values. You need to know what you stand for. I also realize that when I'm living somewhere as a foreigner, as a guest, when I'm making an investment somewhere, when I'm diversifying, it's a bit more nuanced than simply is a left-wing government in charge. Again, avoiding places with crazy wealth confiscating tax governments, yeah, I'm avoiding that. But I am paying attention to the long-term trajectory of places. And I think there's an important nuance there of when it goes from one to the other.
This is how to live like a king in Madrid.